The notary slid the last page across the table and handed me a pen. My hand didn't shake. 8 years of double shifts. Skipped vacations. And eating rice and beans 4 nights a week, and it all came down to this one signature. I pressed the pen to the paper, wrote my name, and pushed it back. The notary smiled. Congratulations. The house is yours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there for a second, letting the words settle into my chest like something I'd been holding my breath for too long to fully receive. Mine. A house that belonged to me. Not a landlord's property I was allowed to occupy in exchange for a third of my paycheck. Not a shared apartment where someone else's rules determined how late I could have the lights on. Mine. Every room. Every closet. Every square foot of that backyard with the old oak tree and the cracked stone path. I drove to the house alone. I'd kept it that way on purpose. No one riding with me to make comments about the neighborhood. The square footage. The fact that I was buying a 3-bedroom as a single woman. I pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and just sat there looking at the front door. Sage green. I'd chosen the color myself from a paint chip I kept in my wallet for 2 years. Just to remind myself it was real. I let myself in, walked through every room in the late afternoon light, and sat down on the kitchen floor because there was no furniture yet. The linoleum was cold and clean. I leaned my back against the cabinets and closed my eyes. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's lawnmower droned in the distance. The refrigerator hummed. The house breathed quietly around me. And for the first time in years, I felt still. That feeling was exactly why I hadn't told my sister. To understand why I kept this to myself, you have to understand what it was like growing up as the younger one. My sister is 6 years older than me, and our entire lives. The script was the same. She was the one who got married young, who had the kids, who needed everyone to bend around her schedule and her struggles. And I was the one who bent. I was the one who babysat for free on weeknights so she and her husband could go out. I was the one who transferred money when rent got tight, who bought school supplies in August, who showed up at every soccer game and school play even when I'd worked a 12-hour shift the night before. None of that was something I resented. Not really. I loved my nieces and nephew. I showed up because I wanted to. What changed was a dinner at my parents' house. About 3 years ago, I'd mentioned, casually, that I was putting money away, saving seriously, that I had a goal. I didn't say what the goal was, just that I had one. My sister set down her fork and looked at me like I'd said something offensive. Saving for what exactly? A house. Eventually, I said. The silence that followed was the particular kind that only happens in families when someone has said a true thing that inconveniences everybody else at the table. My brother-in-law laughed. Not unkindly, but the way people laugh when they think you're being delusional. On a nurse's salary, in this market, people do it. I said. My sister leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. Must be nice to have disposable income. Some of us have 3 kids and a mortgage that went up $200 last month. I know it went up. I said carefully. I helped you with it last month. That's different. How is it different? She shrugged. The kind of shrug designed to end a conversation you've already decided you've won. You don't have responsibilities like we do. You have one income. One set of bills. The rest is yours to do whatever with. So yeah, I guess you can save up for a house you don't really need while the rest of us are barely keeping our heads above water. I looked around the table. My father studied his plate. My mother passed the bread basket. Nobody said anything. The consensus had been delivered and accepted without a single vote being cast in my direction. That was the night I decided that if I ever actually bought the house, my sister would be the last person to know. It took 2 more years after that. 2 more years of pickups and drop-offs and money transfers and birthday presents I charged to a credit card I'd pay off the same month. 2 more years of being useful and present while also, quietly, methodically, stacking every extra dollar I had into an account I didn't mention to anyone. My coworkers knew. My best friend from nursing school knew. My realtor knew. That was the circle, and it was a coworker's Instagram post that undid all of it. I'd had a small, quiet dinner at the house the week after closing. Just 4 people, 2 nurses I'd worked with for years. My best friend. And my neighbor from across the street, who'd introduced herself the day I moved the first boxes in. Her name was Carol. 72 years old. Retired librarian. The kind of woman who noticed everything and said only what was necessary. She brought a bottle of wine and a loaf of sourdough bread she'd made herself. We ate on paper plates on the living room floor because I still didn't have a dining table. It was perfect. One of my coworkers took a photo of the 4 of us by the front window, the sage green door visible through the glass behind us. She posted it to her Instagram that night with a caption about celebrating the good things. I didn't see it until the next morning. By then, my sister had already commented. 3 words. Whose house is this? I stared at my phone for a long time. My stomach dropped the way it does when you've been carefully carrying something for years and feel it start to slip. I didn't answer. I texted my coworker and asked her to take the post down. She did. Within the hour, apologizing profusely. But the comment had already been seen. I knew my sister. She didn't scroll past things that interested her. Sure enough, by that afternoon, my phone showed a text from her. Nice place. When were you going to tell me? I put the phone face down on the counter and went to make coffee. I stood at the kitchen window watching the oak tree in the backyard sway in the wind. I thought about everything I could say. I thought about the honest answer, which was that I hadn't planned on telling her at all. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I already knew exactly what would come next. I was right. By the time you turned back to my phone, there were 4 more messages. The kids would love a yard like that. We've been so cramped here. 3 bedrooms between 5 people is not sustainable. Call me when you get a chance. I think we should talk about this. It's a lot of space for one person. I read them in order. Slowly. Then I set the phone down again. I went through my house. Room by room. The same way I had on closing day. I touched the countertops. I opened the closets. I stood in the backyard for a few minutes with my hands in my pockets. When I came back inside, I wrote back one sentence. I'll call you this weekend. I did not call her that weekend. She showed up instead. It was a Saturday morning. Around 10. I was still in my robe, half-finished coffee in hand. When I heard the knock, I looked through the peephole and saw her standing on my porch with all 3 kids. The youngest balanced on her hip. I opened the door. I was in the neighborhood, she said. She was not in the neighborhood. She lived 40 minutes away. I stepped back and let them in because the alternative was a scene on my porch. And I didn't know my neighbors well enough yet to start like that. The kids scattered immediately. My nephew ran for the backyard. My 2 nieces disappeared upstairs before I could say anything. My sister walked through the ground floor with the unhurried attention of someone doing an appraisal. It's bigger than it looked in the photo, she said. It's not that big. 3 bedrooms, yes. She turned to me and tilted her head. A gesture she had perfected over 40 years that managed to communicate pity and challenge at the same time. You're here alone. I'm aware. I'm just saying. She set her bag on my kitchen counter without asking. It's a lot. For one person. I picked up my coffee mug. It's what I saved for. She was quiet for a moment, watching me. I heard you've been saving for a while. You could have told me. You would have had opinions. I'm your sister. Of course I'd have opinions. That's what family is for. I didn't answer that. She stayed for almost 2 hours. The kids were fine. They played in the backyard. came in for water. Went back out again. Normal kids being kids? That part was genuinely nice. It was my sister's eyes that bothered me. She cataloged everything. How many kitchen cabinets? The size of the upstairs bathroom. Whether the third bedroom had a closet. She wasn't visiting. She was measuring. When she finally gathered the kids to leave, she stood at my front door and looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression she wore when she had already made a decision and was just waiting for the right moment to announce it. "We should talk," she said. "About summer. What about summer school gets out in 6 weeks? The kids are going to be home all day. I have to work. And our place is just..." She stopped herself. Recalibrated. "You have room here. It would be temporary. Just until we figure out the next step." There it was. I'd been waiting for it since the first text, and here it was. Dressed up as a reasonable request. Stated as though it had already been agreed upon. "I'll think about it," I said. Because I wasn't ready for the fight that the honest answer would start. She smiled. "Good." She kissed me on the cheek and walked her kids down the driveway to the car. I stood at the window and watched her go. Then I went to my kitchen counter, picked up my keys, and put them in my bedroom drawer. That wasn't the last visit. And not every one of them was announced. She started showing up without texting first. Always with one of the kids in tow. Always with some casual reason for being in the area. One afternoon I came home from a late shift to find her car parked outside. She was sitting on my porch steps. The door was locked. She said. As if that required explanation. "Yes," I said. "I lock my door. I thought maybe you left a spare somewhere." I looked at her. "I don't." She stood up and smiled brightly. "Can we come in? Lily has to use the bathroom." This is the part I want to be honest about. Because when I tell this story, people ask why I didn't just cut it off then. Why didn't I tell her to stop coming over unannounced? Why didn't I set the boundary clearly? Out loud. Right there on the porch. The truthful answer is that she is my sister. And I had spent 32 years learning to manage her rather than confront her. It wasn't weakness. It was pattern. Deep. Old. Ingrained pattern. And breaking it required more certainty than I had in that moment. Standing in my nurse's scrubs, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, watching my niece bounce urgently on the front step, I let them in. I said nothing. I added it to the running count I was keeping in the back of my mind. The count got harder to ignore 2 weeks later. I came home from an overnight shift and set my keys on the kitchen counter like I always did. I went upstairs. Showered. Came back down. Something felt wrong about the keys. But I couldn't name it at first. I picked them up and turned them over in my hand. They looked the same. Sama ring. Same fob from the dealership. But the front door key there was a small, clean scratch near the tip. A mark I hadn't seen before. Fresh looking. I sat down at the kitchen table and held the keys for a long time. 3 days earlier, my sister had visited while I was home. I'd stepped away to take a work call. Maybe 10 minutes. She'd been alone in the kitchen. My keys were on the counter. I thought about how easy it would be. Press a key into a bar of soap. Photograph the impression. Take it to any hardware store. Have a copy cut in 20 minutes. I wasn't going to wait to find out if I was right. That same afternoon, I called a locksmith. He came out the next morning and replaced every lock on every door. New deadbolts. New knob locks. To reinforce strike plates on the front and back. The locksmith showed me each new key. Bright and unmarked. And I tested every lock myself before he packed up his tools. My sister texted 2 days later asking to stop by. I told her I was working. She asked about the following weekend. I said I'd let her know. I didn't let her know. What I did instead was call the security company that had sent me a mailer when I first closed on the house. I'd set it aside thinking I'd deal with it later. Now later had arrived. 2 technicians spent an afternoon installing cameras at both exterior doors, the garage, the backyard, and 2 interior positions. I chose myself after walking through the house and thinking about angles. They were discreet. You wouldn't notice them unless you were looking. I tested the app on my phone until I could pull up any feed in under 5 seconds. I set motion alerts for every camera. When I was done, I called Carol from across the street. I need to ask you something, I said. Ask. She said, if you ever see a car in my driveway or anyone around the house when I'm not here, will you text me? She didn't ask why. She just said, I've got your number saved. That was the end of June. For most of July, it was quiet. My sister texted occasionally. I kept my answers short. I said I was busy with work, which was true. I didn't invite her over. She didn't push as hard as I expected, which should have told me something. When someone like my sister goes quiet, it doesn't mean she's moved on. It means she's changed strategy. I found out what that strategy was on a Tuesday night in late July, when I was 3 states away at a nursing conference. My phone buzzed at 11:15. Carol, there are lights on in your house. I can hear music. I don't think you're home. I sat up in my hotel bed and pulled up the camera app before I'd fully processed what she'd written. The feed loaded in a few seconds. Living room. Motion had triggered it. My living room was full of people. My sister was in the center of it, standing at my kitchen counter, pouring something into glasses. My nieces were on the couch, phone screens glowing. My nephew was in the backyard. I could see a woman I recognized as my sister's friend near the bookshelf, laughing at something on her own phone. There were at least 4 other people I didn't recognize at all. My house, my furniture, my wine glasses, my sourdough bread board from Carol on the counter with someone else's cheese on it. I sat completely still for a moment. I watched my sister raise a glass. I watched her look around my living room, the way she'd looked around it on her very first visit, like it already belonged to her. I thought about calling her directly. I thought about screaming through the camera speaker, which the app technically allowed. I thought about all the things I could say. All the ways I could humiliate her in front of her friends by appearing as a voice from the ceiling. I didn't do any of it. I took a slow breath. I opened the app on my phone that showed me the full timeline of motion events. The front door had triggered at 9:47 p.m. Not the back door. Not the garage, the front door. With a key, she had made a copy before I changed the locks. Or she'd found another way in. But one of those things was true, and I was going to let the police sort out which. I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. Steady and professional. There are unauthorized people in my home, I said. I'm out of town, but I'm watching them on my security cameras right now. I can see at least 7 people, including at least 1 minor. I don't know how they got in. I did not give anyone permission to be there. The dispatcher asked for the address. I gave it. She asked if I could identify anyone. I paused. Yes, I said. My sister is one of them. Your sister. I did not give her permission to be in my home. I changed all the locks 3 weeks ago specifically because I was concerned about unauthorized access. She had no key and no invitation. The dispatcher said officers were on the way and asked me to stay on the line. I did. I kept the camera feed open on my other screen. 1 eye on each. I watched my sister refill her glass. I watched the squad car's headlights sweep across the front window before anyone inside noticed. I watched someone glance toward the door. I watched the knock. And the way the music cut. And the frozen second before my brother-in-law answered the door in a way that suggested he thought he could bluster through it. He could not bluster through it. I watched the officers step inside. I watched the room go still. I watched my sister's hand lower the wine glass to the counter very slowly. The way you move when you're trying to figure out which story to tell. I couldn't hear the audio clearly enough to make out words. Just tone. The officers were calm. My sister was not She tried to make a call. An officer told her to put her phone down. I sat in my hotel room 1,100 miles away and watched strangers be walked out of my house until the rooms were empty. The music had been turned off. The lights were still on. My cheese board sat abandoned on the counter. The dispatcher came back on the line and confirmed the premises had been cleared. Officers would file a report and request the homeowner come in at her convenience to complete a statement. I thanked her and hung up. I sat in the silence of the hotel room for a long time. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt something cold and settled. The kind of clarity that only comes after you've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for so long that its landing almost feels like relief. I flew home the next day. I went to the police station before I went to the house. I sat across from an officer with a yellow legal pad, and I told him everything from the beginning: the scratch on the key, the locksmith, the cameras, the timeline of visits. The officer listened without interruption, took notes, and then told me what the investigation had confirmed. My sister had not forced any door or broken any window. The lock showed no damage. She had used a key. The locksmith had confirmed to investigators that the lock cylinder I'd had replaced was a standard grade that can be impression copied with nothing more sophisticated than a wax bar or modeling clay and a careful press. The old key, the one with the scratch, had been copied before I changed the locks. My sister had used that copy to walk in like she owned the place. On the assumption that I hadn't changed the deadbolt, or possibly not caring either way, the officer asked if I wanted to press charges. I asked what the charges would be. He listed them: criminal trespass, first degree, possible additional charges related to the key duplication, which had its own legal category depending on the evidence of intent. I thought about my nieces asleep on my couch on my camera feed. I thought about my nephew in my backyard. I thought about every family dinner where I had passed the breadbasket and said nothing. Yes, I said, I want to press charges. My sister was at the station when I walked out of the back hallway. She must have been waiting. She stood up when she saw me, and her face went through several things quickly: relief, hurt, anger, and then the particular expression she'd been using on me since we were children. The one that said, "You are making this very difficult for everyone. I need you to drop this," she said. Lena, please. The kids were there. Do you understand what this looks like for them? I understand what breaking into someone's house looks like. I said, I didn't break in. I had a key. A key you made without my permission from a lock on my house. She shook her head. I thought you'd come around. I thought if you saw how much the kids loved it there. If you saw how we fit, you don't fit. I said quietly, It's not your house. She stared at me. Her eyes filled. But I knew my sister's tears. They were real in the sense that she felt them. But they were also a tool she'd used effectively for decades. I have 3 kids. She said. 3. You have yourself. You have no idea what our situation actually is. I know your situation. I said, I've been helping with your situation for 8 years. I paid 2 months of your rent last year. I bought every back-to-school outfit for the kids for the past 4 years. I covered your deductible when your daughter broke her arm. I know your situation. She went still. But this is my house. I said. I worked for it. I chose it. It is mine in every legal and personal sense. And you walked into it without permission because you decided your need was bigger than my right. And now you're standing here asking me to protect you from the consequences of that. You're my sister. Yes, I said. And you're mine. That's not the same thing as giving you whatever you want. I walked out of the station and drove to my house. Carol was on her porch when I pulled in. She raised a hand in a quiet wave. I raised one back. Inside? The house was mostly as I'd left it. The officers had been careful. A few things were out of place, a throw pillow on the wrong chair. My good cutting board still out on the counter. There was a ring from a wine glass on the coffee table I hadn't fully sealed yet. I cleaned it up methodically. Not from anger. Just from the need to restore the rooms to what they were supposed to be. I sat on the kitchen floor for a little while. The same place I'd sat on closing day. The linoleum was still cold. The refrigerator still hummed. The house still breathed quietly around me. The fallout came in waves over the following weeks. As it always does when something private becomes public in a family, my mother called twice. The first call was searching. Careful. Trying to understand what had happened. The second was harder. She didn't ask me to drop the charges. But she talked around it in a way that amounted to the same request. Your sister's children don't deserve this. I told her I agreed with that. Which was why I was pressing charges against my sister and not her children. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in 2 years sent a Facebook message with 3 paragraphs about forgiveness and the importance of keeping family together. I read it and did not respond. 2 cousins I actually liked texted me separately to say they thought I'd done the right thing. One of them said she'd had her own version of this conversation with my sister years ago and had handled it differently and always regretted it. I appreciated both of those texts more than I could easily say. My sister's husband called once. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was longer than I expected. And quieter. He said he hadn't been there that night. He said he'd found out after the fact. He said he wasn't making excuses. He said he was sorry. I didn't call him back. But I saved the message. At work, a few people knew. Nurses talk. The story was interesting enough to travel. Most people were on my side. But there was always one person in every group who couldn't help wondering aloud if I'd been too hard on family. I stopped engaging with that question after the 3rd time. The answer was always going to be unsatisfying to someone who had never had to defend something they built, from nothing against someone who thought loving them was the same as owning them. My sister's case moved through the system slowly. The way those things do, she retained a lawyer. The charges were ultimately reduced in a plea agreement to a lesser trespass violation with a fine and a mandated stay-away provision that formalized what I'd already decided on my own. She could not come to my property without my explicit written permission. I don't know if she ever fully understood what she'd done wrong. The version of the story she told herself, the one I heard secondhand, was that she had wanted her children to have something, and she'd reached for it in the only way she knew how. I believed that was true. I also believed it was completely beside the point. Carol brought another bottle of wine over the Saturday after everything was officially settled. We sat on my porch in the early evening while the oak tree threw long shadows across the yard. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She just poured 2 glasses and watched the street with me the way she always did. After a while, she said, "You think she learned anything? I think she learned I'll actually do it." I said, "That might be the most she's capable of right now." Carol nodded. "Sometimes that's enough." I'd change the locks again after everything. Even though it wasn't strictly necessary. New hardware. New keys. Same locksmith. He recognized me this time and asked how the house was treating me. "Well," I said, and I meant it. There are things that surprised me about what came after. I expected to feel worse than I did. I expected the guilt to be heavier. The second-guessing louder. What I found instead was something I hadn't had in a long time space. Not the physical kind. Though I had that too, but the mental space that opens up when you stop carrying someone else's choices as if they were your responsibility. I started using my backyard. I bought a small table and 2 chairs and put them under the oak tree and started having my coffee out there in the mornings before early shifts. I started cooking on weekends. Real cooking. The kind that takes time and makes the whole house smell like something good. I started leaving my keys on the kitchen counter without thinking about them. Without picturing someone's hands picking them up. My nieces and nephew, I missed them. I was honest with myself about that. I hoped that when enough time had passed, There would be a way to see them that didn't run through my sister's decisions. That was something I couldn't resolve on my own. I put it in the category of things I could not control and stopped spending my quiet evenings on it. What I had a house with a sage green door, an oak tree, a neighbor across the street who noticed things and said only what was necessary, a coffee maker, I chose myself, a lock that only my key could open. People say a lot of things about family and obligation and sacrifice. They say blood is thicker than water, which is meant to be reassuring but usually just gets used as a crowbar to pry open whatever you've managed to protect for yourself. What I know, what I earned the hard way, across 8 years of double shifts and rice and beans, and one very long series of sleepless nights, is that loving your family and handing over your life are two different things. You can do one without doing the other. It took me too long to learn that. It cost me more than it should have, but I have my house. And for the first time in my adult life, I have peace that belongs entirely to me. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Not held hostage by someone else's expectations. Some mornings I stand in the backyard under the oak tree with my coffee and I think about the moment the notary slid that final page across the table. The way my hand didn't shake. The way the words settled into my chest. Mine. I still feel it every single time.